The canine's vocalizations were unlike a typical bark. They pierced the silence as if a plea for acknowledgement. Along a tranquil path bordering a serene residential area, a single individual paused. Only one. As Ryan directed his attention towards the woods, he was unaware that an injured German shepherd would guide him to an experience far exceeding a simple rescue. The discovery concealed within the trees was not merely a life precariously sustained. It marked the commencement of an unfolding enigma that would reveal conflict, sorrow, and a connection so potent it challenged reason. At the core of this was a dog that had already preserved more lives than could be tallied. This narrative concerns unwavering devotion and a mission that persisted indefinitely. Ryan Hale was not an individual who courted notice. In recent times, he generally shunned it. A 42-year-old ex-EMT, his bearing suggested burdens greater than what was visible. Ryan had become adept at the subtle skill of fading into obscurity. Existence had once been clamorous, filled with the wail of sirens, the glare of hospital lights, the joyous sounds of a wedding celebration. However, following the incident, his life had contracted. He resided by himself, held a part-time position at a storage facility, and journeyed to a modest park on the periphery of suburban North Carolina each afternoon, seeking not physical exertion or communion with the environment, but solely tranquility. On a day late in September, a significant change occurred. The heavens displayed a pale blue hue, signaling the imminent departure of summer. Foliage quivered with the expectation of autumn. Ryan secured his vehicle, locked its doors from ingrained habit, and proceeded towards the slender path that meandered among the trees. He remained oblivious to the families enjoying themselves on picnic seating or the children engaged in a soccer game close by. Yet something or someone observed him. It commenced as a faint cry, acute, tense, slicing through the gentle wind like the sound of shattered glass on a hard surface. He paused, tilting his head. The sound recurred, nearer this time. It was not the cry of a child, nor the call of a bird. No, this sound was imbued with alarm. A German shepherd was positioned near the aged wooden trail marker, one paw raised unnaturally, its coat caked with soil and congealed blood. The canine was not vocalizing to attract notice. It was imploring. Ryan blinked. Individuals ambled by, engrossed in their audio devices and mobile phones. Yet the dog's gaze remained fixed solely upon him, steadfast, unwavering, as if it had deliberately selected him from the multitude. He advanced a tentative step. The dog pivoted and moved with a limp, disappearing into the periphery of the woodland. It was without a lead, without a guardian, driven only by resolve. Ryan paused. His intuition insisted this was another's duty, yet he already understood it to be his own. A segment of his being, the part that retained memories of dismantling mangled vehicles on unlit roads and comforting unfamiliar hands amidst the shriek of emergency sirens, was jolted into action. He pursued. The surfaced walkway vanished in a matter of minutes. The noises of the park receded. The trees seemed to engulf him entirely. The woodland was not dense, yet it encroached sufficiently to evoke a sense of being unwelcome. The path, if it merited such a description, was irregular and interlaced with roots. Ryan tripped over fallen limbs, pushed past low-slung boughs, and maintained his focus on the fleeting glimpses of tan and black fur moving in front of him. The dog did not vocalize again, nor did it glance backward, but it reduced its pace just enough at regular intervals to ascertain that Ryan continued to follow. Peculiar thoughts traversed his mind, predominantly recollections. The final disagreement with his spouse, the message to which she never replied. The instant he comprehended the collision was deadly. He had not wept for months, perhaps even years. Yet, at this moment, his chest felt as if something had fractured within. The dog maneuvered beneath a downed tree. Ryan did likewise. He understood this was more than an animal in distress. It was an appeal, a challenge. And though he was unprepared for what lay ahead, he was also unable to retreat. Further on, the density of the trees diminished somewhat. The dog halted, its ears erect. The scent of the air had altered, it was moist, unsettled. Ryan entered the open space, his breathing labored. It was then that he perceived it. The open area was silent, excessively so. Ryan advanced cautiously, his heart pounding, his gaze darting between areas of shade. The atmosphere had changed, laden with the smell of moist soil and that peculiar quietude that often precedes a momentous alteration. The dog was positioned at the perimeter of the area, its tail lowered but attentive, its ears directed towards something in the distance. It emitted a single bark, not fearful, not despairing, but crisp and intentional, a clear indication. Ryan's sight followed the sound. Initially, it appeared to be insignificant, merely dislodged leaves, fractured boughs, and flattened undergrowth. But then, beneath the concealment of fallen branches, he noticed the depression, a constricted pit, nearly imperceptible from afar. Its periphery was bordered with unhewn logs and rocks, as if an attempt had been made to integrate it with the forest terrain. It was not a natural formation. It was not unintentional. He moved nearer. That is when he observed the unnaturally angled leg, bloodstains on a trouser leg, and a hand feebly spasming against the dirt. "Sir," Ryan called out, kneeling at the pit's rim. There was no reply, only a faint moan. His training asserted itself. Within moments, Ryan had retrieved his phone, his voice composed, proficient, and familiar in a manner that astonished him. Male casualty, approximately mid-50s, conscious yet disoriented, compound fracture of the right femur. Potential internal trauma. Dispatch an ambulance. Dense woodland posterior to Maple Ridge Park. While he communicated, the German Shepherd remained stationary. It stood watch directly behind Ryan, observing the individual below as if sustaining his life through sheer determination. It was not mere fortune. The pit was situated sufficiently deep and concealed adequately that even frequent trekkers might have overlooked it. Ryan was unable to cease pondering how many individuals had passed by unaware. For what duration had the dog awaited the appropriate person to pursue as emergency sirens began to resonate in the distance? Ryan descended cautiously into the pit. The man's countenance was pallid, abraded, and covered in grime. His lips stirred, forming words with difficulty. "You discovered me," he murmured. "No," Ryan responded gently, looking towards the dog. "He did." The emergency medical team arrived shortly thereafter. It was organized turmoil. Stretchers, medical kits, and vocal exchanges among the emergency personnel filled the air. Ryan assisted in steadying the man to the best of his ability, adrenaline rendering his actions exact. Many years had elapsed since his last field rescue operation, yet certain skills remained dormant, awaiting activation. As the man was extracted, the dog advanced. All eyes turned towards it, this quiet, injured guardian. A paramedic extended a hand towards it slowly, but before any response could occur, the dog pivoted and retreated into the forest. "Wait!" Ryan exclaimed. Yet, the dog did not turn. It moved as if with a purpose, as if its task was completed. "No identification," one law enforcement officer mumbled. "No collar, nothing?" "He located that man," Ryan stated softly. "Guided me directly to him." A junior EMT emitted a soft whistle. "Then he is the cause of this man's survival." As the team gathered their equipment and the injured individual was swiftly transported, Ryan remained motionless at the forest's edge. The wind bore the fragrance of moss and something more ancient, something hallowed. The dog had vanished, once more absorbed by the trees. But it had left an imprint, not merely a rescue, not solely an enigma, but a query, one that would seize Ryan with greater intensity than he anticipated. Who was this canine? And how many existences had it already altered? Ryan was positioned in the center of his kitchen, a cup of coffee cooling in his grasp. The day following the woodland rescue had passed, yet his reflections remained fixed. He was not troubled by the vision of the man in the pit, nor by the seriousness of what could have transpired had he not been present. What preoccupied him, what held his thoughts captive like a persistent murmur, was the dog, that German Shepherd, its gaze. He had experience with trauma victims, he had witnessed the injured, the battered, the resilient. But this canine was not simply a creature operating on impulse. There was intellect in its composure, intention in its actions. That was not an accidental cry. That was not coincidence. That dog had anticipated his arrival, specifically his. Consequently, Ryan did something he had not undertaken for years. He returned to the hospital. The individual they had rescued, Daniel Webb, was in a stable state, bandaged, supported, and mildly tranquilized. He appeared to have aged significantly in a single night. Nevertheless, when Ryan entered the room, Daniel Webb opened his eyes and offered a slow, weak smile. "You once more," he said hoarsely. "Are you the gentleman with the spectral canine?" Ryan arched an eyebrow. "Spectral canine?" Daniel Webb chuckled despite his discomfort. "I was drifting in and out of consciousness, you understand, barely able to draw breath. I could no longer shout, but I heard him barking as if his very spirit was ablaze, as if he refused to abandon me. I believed I was imagining things until your arrival. He then fell silent, gazing out the window. That dog, he mused, it didn't bark like an ordinary stray. It barked as though someone had trained it to vocalize with such intensity only when it was crucial. Ryan departed from the hospital more bewildered than before and now even more fixated. He commenced an investigation not through internet queries but through traditional methods. He returned to the park. Each day for the subsequent week, he traversed the trail during the early morning and late afternoon, wearing the same footwear, following the same route with a pocket containing dog treats, yet Shadow did not appear. Residents started to share stories. An elderly woman walking her schnauzer mentioned having observed the same German shepherd barking near a storm culvert months prior. She had contacted animal control, suspecting a young dog might have become trapped. Upon their arrival, they discovered an ensnared infant raccoon. The dog vanished before they could express their gratitude. An adolescent on a skateboard asserted that the dog had escorted him home one evening after he had suffered a severe fall on the trail, resulting in a fractured arm. He stated the dog waited outside the emergency room entrance, then disappeared before his mother could take a photograph. He's not merely a dog, the youth remarked. He's something different. They referred to him as Shadow. Some speculated he was a missing canine. Others murmured he was a phantom, a guardian, a solitary figure who materialized when no one else would. Ryan was uncertain what to accept as true, but he sensed a definite internal change. The name resonated with him, Shadow. It was not a name evocative of barking, growling, or retrieving. It sounded like something that existed in the spaces between breaths, between illumination and quietude. Ryan could not articulate it, but the more frequently he heard the name, the more he perceived it not as a moniker, but as an identity, one selected by the dog itself. Upon returning to his residence, Ryan opened an aged metallic container he had not handled in years. Within were discolored photographs, military identification tags, and a folded uniform that retained a faint scent of sand and perspiration, his former EMT insignia. He ran his thumb along the edges of the identification. Somewhere amidst the creased material and the burden of recollection, he comprehended something peculiar. He was no longer solely seeking the dog. He was hopeful that the dog was also seeking him. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was precisely what Shadow had been doing all along. By the dawn of the 5th day, Ryan had committed to memory every fissure in the trail's surface. Every curve where the sunlight permeated the trees in a particular manner. He no longer knew what he anticipated discovering. Perhaps paw marks, perhaps a fleeting glimpse of fur, perhaps merely solace. The park had transformed from a location of chance encounters to something hallowed, a segment of terrain where his heart rate finally decelerated and his thoughts were less tumultuous. He now carried provisions, treats, a foldable water container, a small first aid kit. On most days, these items remained unused in his rucksack, yet it felt like a customary practice, like presenting an oblation to something untamed and primordial. Still, there was no sign of Shadow. Until that particular Wednesday, Ryan had almost abandoned his search for the day when his footwear sank into the moist embankment of the stream near the forest edge. He halted, not due to weariness, but because an object captured his attention. Partially obscured paw prints in the mire, larger than any he had previously observed. He pursued the indistinct trail, each footfall a pulse of tentative optimism, until he arrived at a fallen tree trunk near the perimeter of the woods. There, incised into the decomposing bark, were 4 distinct, intentional claw marks, evenly spaced, sharp, exact. Not made in haste, not unintentional. He squatted, tracing them with his fingers. It was not merely an impression. It was a communication intended not for others, but for him. That evening, Ryan found no repose. His thoughts reviewed every peculiar encounter, every hushed narrative from the local residents. It was not solely the rescues. There was a deliberate choice involved. This dog was not meandering without direction. It was pursuing sorrow like a hunting dog. And if it was tracking sorrow, why him, Ryan? He retrieved his old laptop, cleared the dust from its surface, recalled forgotten access codes, and began to examine reports of lost dogs, logs of missing K-9 units, anything that might resemble Shadow's appearance. He narrowed his search until he encountered a blurred image in a 7-year-old news piece. A German shepherd alongside a young Marine, both coated in desert grime, tongues lolling, eyes luminous. The caption stated, Sergeant Nolan Graves and his partner, Ranger, Kandahar, 2016. The article recounted that they were involved in an IED explosion while on patrol. Nolan Graves perished immediately. Ranger was thought to be deceased. Ryan enlarged the image, focusing on the dog's eyes. There was no doubt. It was him. He blinked, recoiled slightly, his heart racing. Not solely due to the discovery, but because he understood its implications. Ranger had not perished, or if he had, the information had not been universally received. The name etched into the log, the quietness of his movements, the gaze that conveyed a sorrow more profound than any restraint could impose. This was not merely an abandoned canine. This was a dog still engaged in service. And abruptly, Ryan felt as though he was not confronting an enigma, but rather stepping into the continuation of another's uncompleted duty. The following day, he undertook an action that astonished even himself. He journeyed to a tranquil ranch situated on the town's outskirts, a place he had not frequented in many years. The name displayed on the mailbox was Monroe. Elias Monroe, a former K-9 handler, was recognized in the local area for assisting canines that others were unable to help. It was said he was difficult to converse with, that he perceived things beyond ordinary comprehension. Ideal. Ryan stood at the entrance, holding the article in one hand, the image of the 4 claw marks seared into his mind. The breeze gently pulled at the paper's edges. The past was no longer merely murmuring. It was summoning him directly. The entrance to Elias Monroe's ranch creaked as if it had remained unopened for weeks. Corrosion adorned its hinges, and an adjacent sign cautioned, "No soliciting, no nonsense," deterring unwelcome visitors. Ryan paused for merely a moment before proceeding. The gravel path ascended a hill, bordered by pine trees, aged fencing, and 2 former patrol canines reclining in the sunlight. One raised its head, refrained from barking, and simply observed appropriately. The dwelling was unpretentious. A single-story wooden structure with a veranda encircling it, and a porch swing that swayed with a sound suggestive of concealed histories. Ryan ascended the stairs and rapped on the door. There was no response, only the sound of the wind. He knocked once more. This time he heard footfalls, heavy, measured. Then the door swung inward. Elias Monroe occupied the doorway like a figure sculpted from oak. 60 years of age, perhaps more, with a time-worn countenance and light blue eyes. He was a man who had previously battled intensely and had not yet ceased his struggle, merely altered his adversary. He surveyed Ryan from head to toe, then glanced at the folder beneath his arm. "Graves," Elias Monroe stated. Ryan blinked. "How did you?" "I rarely receive guests bearing military K-9 dossiers unless they are in pursuit of phantoms." He moved to the side. "Enter." Within, the atmosphere was dense with the scent of aged wood and quietude. There was no television, no radio, only framed images of dogs. In training, in action, some accompanied by flags, others beside caskets. Elias Monroe approached a substantial oak cabinet, unlatched it, and retrieved a thick dossier marked Ranger. "You believe you encountered him?" Elias Monroe inquired, turning the pages. "You are not the initial one." Ryan recounted everything. The rescue, the paw, the woodland, the claw imprints, the photograph, and the expression in Shadow's eyes that had haunted him since. Elias Monroe acknowledged with a slow nod. Ranger was exceptional. He saved more individuals than most entire units. But following that explosion, his remains were never located. Only blood, fragments. Nolan Graves was deceased. Everyone presumed Ranger was as well. He pushed a photograph across the table. Ranger alongside Sergeant Nolan Graves, both grimy yet beaming as if they had just overcome an insurmountable obstacle. But canines such as him do not simply disappear, Elias Monroe remarked. They recollect. They bear burdens. Ryan sat in astonished quietude. "Do you believe he is still attempting to fulfill his duty?" "I believe," Elias Monroe responded. He never ceased. Ranger was conditioned to detect trauma, emotional anguish, PTSD, the kind that cannot be feigned or concealed. That dog could enter a space filled with people and identify the one teetering on the brink. That struck with visceral force. Elias Monroe observed Ryan intently. "Allow me to surmise. You experienced a profound loss," Ryan affirmed. "My wife, 3 years prior, in a vehicular accident. I was unable to save her." Elias Monroe remained impassive. "Then Ranger did not encounter you by chance. He approached because he sensed your impending collapse, and he dedicated his existence to preventing individuals like you from disintegrating." The room fell silent once more, but this time the quietude felt hallowed, as if it were not devoid but laden with significance, with intent, with existences interconnected by unseen filaments. Prior to Ryan's departure, Elias Monroe presented him with the dossier. "Take it. If he is alive, he merits recognition beyond a spectral tale. He merits a return home." And in that instant, Ryan was no longer pursuing an enigma. He was shouldering a mission, one that would guide him to verities far more profound than any news report and to a location in the forest unrecorded even on maps. Upon returning to his residence, Ryan found himself unable to remain stationary. The instant he placed Elias Monroe's file upon his kitchen table, an internal transformation occurred. That folder contained more than official military documentation. It was a chart of sorrow, devotion, and unspoken conflicts waged beyond the traditional theater of war. Ranger was not merely a lost canine. He was a filament linking narratives previously unobserved. And Ryan could no longer resist its insistent tug. He dedicated the subsequent few days to intensive investigation. He contacted organizations for veterans, counselors specializing in PTSD, and previous comrades of Sergeant Nolan Graves. He meticulously examined forums for dog handlers, governmental records, and even little-known Afghan local news sources. The fragments began to coalesce like a mosaic saturated with sorrow and the passage of time. Sergeant Graves was renowned for his connection with Ranger. In photographs from their deployment, the two were seldom apart. Graves, a combat medic, was trained to preserve lives, not to end them. Ranger was his constant companion, his associate, and by all accounts, his anchor of lucidity in an environment where mental stability was precarious. However, during their final operation in Kandahar, an IED struck the foremost vehicle. Graves was inside. Officially, Ranger was believed to have perished in the explosion, yet a small number of local inhabitants provided contradictory accounts of a severely injured dog circling the debris for days, one that remained long after the deceased were removed. That was not mere allegiance. It was sorrow. It was trauma expressed in a vernacular comprehensible only to the heart. Ryan could not dismiss the notion. How did this canine, if it was indeed Ranger, arrive in North Carolina? It seemed illogical unless one ceased rational thought and began to consider emotional motivations. Ranger had lost his human companion. Perhaps the only remaining course for him was to ensure others did not endure similar suffering. One rescue at a time, one distressed cry in the woods addressed, one fractured spirit mended quietly in obscurity. Ryan's computer screen displayed a multitude of markers, news reports, blog entries, forum discussions, and accounts from survivors. Individuals from this very town and adjacent counties who had previously asserted they were rescued by an enigmatic dog. A man near a fatal overdose discovered unconscious outside his residence with claw marks on the door. A woman immobilized by a panic attack on a park path, led to safety by a silent German shepherd. A child, missing for a night, found nestled beside a large dog beneath an old bridge. And every single narrative shared a common element. No one ever apprehended the dog. No one knew its origin. No tags, no microchip. Only those same somber eyes, filled with an ancient quality: loss, devotion, and intent. What impacted Ryan most profoundly was not the enigma, but the underlying mission. At some juncture, Ranger had resolved that if he could not save his own handler, he would save everyone else who brought Graves to mind. That constituted his current conflict, and it had not concluded with a military interment. It had merely commenced beneath a covering of foliage and shadows. Yet, there was a final element, an intuition Ryan could not dispel. Every one of these rescues had occurred in proximity to a very particular segment of the forest. The area with contorted oak trees, an empty quietude, and an atmosphere that felt unnervingly still. He printed a topographical chart, superimposing all the reported sightings. And there it was, a pattern. All of it converged around a single location deep within the woods, where the path terminated and the untamed wilderness started. Ranger had not merely been assisting. He was protecting something, overseeing something unseen by others. And Ryan was determined to discover it. The heavens were laden with clouds, not tempestuous, but muted, as if they too were in suspense. Ryan positioned himself at the forest's perimeter, his boots firm on the moist ground, a map in one hand, determination in the other. The forest was no longer alien to him. It was now hallowed, and he was proceeding directly into its core. The path constricted, the undergrowth encroaching like inquisitive observers. Yet, on this occasion, there was no apprehension, only a pressure in his chest propelling him onward. Shadow materialized unexpectedly. No sound of movement, no vocalization, just a gradual appearance from among the trees as if he had been anticipating him. The dog did not flee, nor did it exhibit a limp. It simply regarded Ryan, then pivoted and proceeded. Ryan pursued. For a continuous 30 minutes, they journeyed further than Ryan had ever ventured, passed down tree trunks, overlooked paths, and the subdued melodies of birds. Shadow moved with purpose, navigating the dense vegetation as if possessing precise knowledge of their destination. Then, they arrived at a small clearing, encircled by ancient oak trees whose branches arched inward, resembling a natural sanctuary. And then Shadow halted. He turned towards a rise in the ground near the base of the most substantial tree. No identifying sign, no floral tributes, only leaves, moss, and a slight indentation in the earth. Ryan's breath hitched. Shadow advanced and commenced digging, not with desperate haste, but with a slow, measured action, each paw movement purposeful. Ryan sank to his knees alongside him. After several inches, the earth yielded to a firm object. Metal, a dog tag. Ryan retrieved it with unsteady fingers, worn, discolored, yet the inscription remained discernible. Nolan Graves, USMC. He was incapable of speech, scarcely able to draw breath. He looked at Shadow, who had settled beside the excavation, motionless, his gaze fixed not on the tag, but on the ground, on the recollection, on the vow. This was the location, unknown to anyone else. A soldier's final resting place, established not through military rites, but through a devotion more profound than kinship. Ryan surveyed his surroundings. There were no tombstones, no floral tributes, no formal salutations, yet the atmosphere vibrated with a hallowed quality, as if the trees themselves had been safeguarding this spot, with Shadow as their guardian. Ryan remained seated for what seemed like an eternity. He could envision it now. Ranger, injured, solitary, transporting whatever he could manage across formidable landscapes, traversing ports, railway depots, urban centers, all for this purpose. All to inter the man he had ceaselessly cherished. Not due to orders, but from an intrinsic need, because an internal drive would not permit him rest until Graves had a final sanctuary. Right here, where the world was tranquil and the foliage offered no judgment for a canine bearing sorrow on its four paws. And then the realization struck Ryan. Every life Shadow had impacted, every rescue, had been his method of perpetuating Graves' mission. It was not arbitrary. It was not instinct. It was remembrance. Ranger had assimilated his handler's compassion. Ryan reached into his pack and retrieved a small wooden cross he had carried, just in case. He engraved the names unhurriedly, Nolan and Ranger, then secured it in the ground. Shadow stood alongside him, his tail lowered, his expression gentle. And for the initial time, Shadow pressed against Ryan's side, not merely with confidence, but with a sense of unburdening. He had accomplished it. He had fulfilled his vow. Ryan did not hastily depart from the forest that evening. He was unable to. The clearing beneath the oak tree had transformed into something beyond hallowed. It was now a concluded chapter, with a new one poised to begin. He remained beside Shadow for hours, the silence between them more potent than any spoken language. The dog's respiration had altered, slower, more profound, not labored, merely weary, like an individual who had at last completed their final assignment. When Ryan exited the forest the following morning, he came back with wood and implements. Over the subsequent few days, he constructed a simple item, a bench. Not refined, not elaborate, just unadorned. On its back, he meticulously carved the names, Nolan Graves and Ranger, with a subtle paw print incised between them. Then, adjacent to the tree, he positioned a handcrafted wooden cross and encircled it with wildflowers collected from the path. It was not an official military monument, but it bore a weightier significance. Remembrance, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. News disseminated rapidly. Initially, a fellow trekker chanced upon the bench and shared an image on the internet. Subsequently, a local news outlet reported the story. Enigmatic canine guides man to overlooked grave of deceased Marine. Within days, the clearing transformed into a serene place of homage. Military veterans were the first to arrive. Some with difficulty walking, some in uniform, some in quiet contemplation. One left a commemorative patch from his unit. Another offered a salute with unsteady hands. Then ordinary individuals began to visit, parents, students, canine enthusiasts. Some presented flowers, others left messages, but the majority simply sat and absorbed the atmosphere, listening not to Ryan, nor to any orator, but to the narrative held within the trees. At the subsequent town commemorative event, Ryan received an invitation to address the attendees. He stood before them, his hands trembling slightly, observing the expressions of the crowd, some inquisitive, some tearful, all expectant. And he recounted the entire story, not merely about the grave, but about the German shepherd who persisted in aiding people even after the conflict. About a dog that appeared where it was required, not for commendation, not for renown, but to provide solace, to complete what his handler had initiated. When Ryan concluded his speech, a young man, approximately 19 or 20 years of age, approached him, tears flowing down his face. It was him, he stated softly. 3 years prior, I was prepared to end my life. I was in the woods. And this dog, he appeared, simply sat with me until I became composed. I have never disclosed this to anyone until this moment. Additional accounts emerged. A woman who reported her daughter was rescued from a river's edge, a runner who had fractured his leg during a storm and never comprehended how assistance arrived so swiftly. Narrative after narrative, each like a fragment of a larger picture, all indicating the same canine, ranger, shadow, guardian. Then, on a brisk morning, Ryan revisited the oak tree just as sunlight pierced the canopy. Shadow was present, nestled by the bench, his eyes shut, his form motionless, serene. Ryan knelt tenderly, placing a hand on his flank. The heat was diminishing, but there was no suffering, only repose. Shadow had selected this location for his ultimate vigil, enveloped by recollections, by intent, and by affection. Ryan did not weep immediately, he simply remained there, his hand upon the dog that had reconstructed his existence through quietude and companionship. Later, the community assisted in transporting Shadow to a final resting place adjacent to Nolan Graves. They interred him beneath a substantial covering of soil, enfolded in a flag, alongside a toy bone Ryan had discovered within his rucksack, one that had not been there previously, as if placed by another, or by a superior force. The oak tree now shelters 2 graves, a single bench, and innumerable narratives of individuals who arrived fragmented and departed somewhat more complete. And when the breeze rustles through the clearing in a particular way, it almost resembles a bark, faint, remote, yet distinct. A testament that heroes do not invariably don uniforms, some are clad in fur and never request anything in return.